I will very quickly introduce Meredith Gran, who is the prolific comic creator and the obvious creator of Perfect Tide Station to Station, who was the IGF winner of Best Narrative of last year. It was nominated for the Seamus McNally Grand Prize in games, in indie games. And most importantly, was the Best in Show winner of the showcase last year. And so we're really excited to have her here talking about her experience making games and what it looks like for her. And so with that, I would like to introduce Meredith. Please come up.
Thank you for that. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to NarraScope. My name is Meredith Gran. I'm 41. That will be relevant. I spent the early days of my life as an artist making comics and animation. I worked in both of those industries on and off, though I ultimately went it alone to make the work that really mattered to me. My webcomic, Octopus Pie, took me on a 10-year journey, initially to hone my skills as a writer of gag comic strips, and eventually, by accident, to document something much more personal and immediate. By the time the strip ended, I felt I'd said all there was to say about that period of my life, which was a feeling both satisfying and frightening. The end of one's 20s can feel like the end of everything. Responsibilities mount, friends drift off into their own lives, and you're left examining what you've made of yourself or what life has made of you. At this point, making a change felt powerful. I left New York, got pregnant, and started making video games pretty much all at once. Those early days were so shaky, learning to code and drafting dialogue as I nursed my sickness and the changes in my body. I wasn't sure what this work would amount to. I didn't know if I was any good at it. I was serious, but it was all new. I didn't know anything about the jobs of motherhood or game development, which from here on out become pretty much interchangeable. Many people believed in my seriousness. Loved ones will eagerly tell you what a great parent you'll be, despite their lack of any evidence. And the games press, more robust in 2017, seemed curious and refreshed by my presence. In fact, I'm pretty sure I did more interviews when I announced the game than when I released it in 2022. We'll talk more about that later. My son was born in the spring of 2018, just weeks after I'd publicly raised funds for the game. It no longer mattered if I was serious or not because I was doing it. Perfect Ties was my first game and my most ambitious work yet. In hindsight, it feels kind of small to me. A game you can finish in about 6 hours that draws heavily, almost criminally, from the mechanics of a 90s Sierra point-and-click adventure. But there were days when working on Perfect Tides felt like doing the impossible. Carving out hours from an hourless day. Wrestling silence and contemplation from a messy, distracted mind. And I'm very proud of what I did, and I think that the circumstances under which it was created were formative. I can never go back to the person I was or the way I used to create, and I think that's good. The sequel followed immediately because I forgot to take a break, and it was difficult in all new ways. My son at this point was far more independent, but his life was more full of friends and school and extracurriculars. Similarly, my skills at crafting and shipping games had been proven, but my vision of game design and what was possible in narrative had grown. Always, I had to do more. And of course, this second game ended up taking just as long. Started in 2022, Perfect Tide Station to Station came out this past January. I feel that in all this time, in life and in games, I have been doing my best work, but things have changed around me. The cruelty of life in America has seemingly reached a fever pitch. As finance shifts ravenously to its next scheme, the landscape of games has transformed, largely to our detriment. Our digital lives have changed, reshaped to accommodate the whims of tech billionaires. And I think while some of these changes hit us like a brick, and others happen slower and more imperceptibly, we're all very aware of it now. Here's my very scientific chart of what's going on right now. Citations at the end of the speech. It's not easy to be a writer or an artist or a computer programmer in 2026, but it should be, because these are skills we possess independently of the whims of the powerful. And no matter how thoroughly they've been devalued as jobs, we know the ability to create is greater than its weight in gold, because creation of artistic works is meaningful. It's the search for the truth. We must wield it as such. Forces conspire to prevent this. Things get very muddled when we conflate the artistic possibilities of games with the AAA industry and the small handful of platforms where all games are forced to coexist. As we mingle in this homogenized ecosystem, our sense of the truth is distorted. And if we seek to live intentionally in these trying times, we must burn a path through the fog. In Howard's End, published in 1912, E.M. Forster writes, "Frida was sharp, abominably sharp, and quite capable of remarking, 'You love one of the young gentlemen opposite, yes?' The remark would be untrue, but of the kind which, if stated often enough, may become true, just as the remark, 'England and Germany are bound to fight,' renders war a little more likely each time it is made, and is therefore made the more readily by the gutter press of either nation. Have the private emotions also their gutter press." This may be an obvious point to arrive at, but I realized not long ago that games discourse isn't real, like at all. Not the right-wing rage bait of the weak manufactured for clicks, nor the condemnation of these takes at face value, often by well-meaning but highly distressed people. As Milos Hantani put it in a recent blog post, quote, "I think there is partly a ritual function to these discourses. The participants are able to strengthen their identities as gamers and people who value games. So in this sense, the point of discourse is not to reach any concrete end. It is really arguing as a means towards having the identity as a gamer or game designer." Now, I could leave it there and say the content of this discourse is rarely valuable, at least doesn't amount to the deep critical discussion we'd like it to. But I'll go one further and say that reading this stuff kind of makes me feel like I'm stupider than before. A little like this. Like it's harder than ever to access how I really feel about things, and certainly harder to talk about it when I try to engage with or even look at these discussions. I think vaguely we all feel this way. And I went around the world and collected real pictures of people feeling this way to make sure we can see. We all feel this way, and I'm including right-wing chuds in this. Like so many who are manipulated into misogynist or racist conspiracy theory, they correctly recognize that something isn't right. They see a game they don't like the look of, and they feel alienated, wondering why it's the only thing anyone is talking about. The answer more or less comes down to PR, which is the main utility of our games press, and increasingly the utility of discourse. In a financialized world with a hollowed out critical sphere, where few are curating tight communities, broad discovery, or deep analysis, liking and disliking mass market products has become, for many, a sole form of expression. Big tech have paved a smooth platform over the once wild internet. It's no coincidence that the idioms for deep work and analysis, getting one's hands dirty, getting into the weeds, touching grass, are all forbidden here. They've robbed us of our ability to find the basis of our disagreements, to really argue. And I love to argue. It's one of the founding promises of the old internet that we now feel we've lost. As a culturally Jewish person, intellectual curiosity, woo, yeah, that's right. Intellectual curiosity is important to me. The saying goes, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Our arguments are legendary, documented in the Talmud. It hurts me that the ability to be an opinionated crank about art that I love so much has been beaten into the shape of 2 poles in an endless culture war. Let people enjoy things may as well be a Nazi slogan to me. I enjoy the stimulation of warring thoughts, and I fear I'm not strong enough to fight what this world has become. As you can imagine, I've been sucked into discourse myself. I've had decent success not participating in it directly. Being a busy parent helps, but I'm still reading it, still letting the carb overload of too much bad take pasta give me a headache. And inevitably, it does influence how I think. It puts the fear in me that the things I have to express will be deliberately misconstrued. And perhaps I'll have my life ruined if the enraged eye of the internet turns to me. Now, the reason I love NarraScope, oh wait, I have a picture of us. It's us from last year. Now, the reason I love NarraScope is it's a rare chance for many of us to meet in person and hash these things out for real. It's also a place to appreciate smaller games that are not reliant or even interested in the industry at large. But it's still an escape from the life we must return to on Monday. And even the smallest games are beholden to the digital hell they inhabit. The ridiculous fees, the fickle algorithms, the prudish content restrictions, the distracted/infuriated masses. I think maybe the only thing I or any of us can do is turn away from all this. In anger, if we must. Anger is often the thing that's worked best for me. It motivates me to create when I feel nobody is doing the thing I want to see. And with any hope, it motivates me to take back my agency, the alternating quiet and cacophony of my own thoughts, and reclaim the intimacy of creation. We must learn to tell the truth in narrative. And a big unteachable part of that is learning to find the truth in ourselves. The nostalgia market seeks to blind us from our past. We are not made of the games and movies of our childhoods. Those are merely a shallow backdrop to the true adventure of coming into one's own. Occasionally, a player will pick up one of my games and fight it the whole way down. They look at what I'm bearing as the truth of my adolescence and declare with a straight face that they never did anything so stupid. I can't tell people what's worth revisiting from their past, but I can say that the past is worth revisiting, especially when it hurts. There is a lot to be found in that pain. Maybe I have a higher threshold of tolerance for it. Maybe I'm more of a freak than I know. But I suspect we're all able to face our past pain if we're strong enough. And in doing so, it's possible to find more strength. I believe that once somebody looks directly at their past pain, really looks at it, they will see the shape of something profound and maybe even funny. And then they will feel what's human and universal in that pain. And it won't feel so lonely to hurt anymore. And then we can really talk about it. Why would we put that in a video game? Because games are perfect for this, specifically narrative games. I don't necessarily think Balatro should hit you with your childhood trauma between blinds, but I reject the notion that games with real human stories lose their escapist quality. What safer place to examine the cold realities and aching questions of life than an enclosed, formal environment where you can die and destroy without consequence? My games begin with a story. The story is not a modular component of the machine. Young game developers are often encouraged to start with raw gameplay and prototyping with primitive graphics. But when it comes to narrative, that doesn't make sense. Narrative games are often praised with an asterisk, as if their writing cannot pass the filter of great film or literary works. If we want fully written games, we must envision them as narratives from the beginning and let the mechanical components rise naturally into view. Here's some of my early notes. Why must a scene exist? Sorry, once again. Why does a scene exist? Why must a scene exist? Not all scenes act in service of the narrative. I want to be very clear that they don't all need to, but they do have to dance for their dinner. I think it's important to ask this question about every slice of your story, and for you, the writer, to be able to defend that slice's existence with your life. If you're not motivated to do that, it probably should go. But if you are, any reason at all will do. Sometimes you just feel a scene in your balls. And if you do, I think the player will too. Now here is some of the action that I added to scenes after I had written them. And looking at this now, because I haven't looked at it in a while, I'm realizing that really less than half of this actually made it into the game. So obviously a lot of back and forth is happening in this stage. When a scene has taken shape, it's easier to turn it over and ask questions. What has to be said? What's at stake? Where is the tension? How is the player meant to feel? What sort of choices can be contemplated in this moment? In a sense, this is its own sort of prototype. The events of the story are the raw elements, the gray boxes. Now we can play with interactivity. I like to add choices to dialogue, not just for the interactive element, but for the two believable viewpoints it gives our protagonist. In a game about an anxious character navigating young adult relationships, the player can contemplate, along with Mara, the right or wrong thing to say in a moment. Some of the choices have consequences, but many of them don't. It's not necessary for the story to always be branching unless the narrative envisions multiple cathartic outcomes. What's important is that the essential beats of our story are not sacrificed in the interest of player agency. We can always imagine a player who will want more choice, more branching, more power to customize their experience. But I've found that players are often willing to surrender this agency if you make it worth their while. Love is an act of surrender. And being drawn into a story, committing yourself to wherever it may go, is a wonderful feeling. Besides, agency can be found in many places. Sometimes the game waits for any input at all. Even a small amount of mechanical fidgeting can help the player feel more involved in what's unfolding, or at very least create the space needed to inhabit a story for longer. Sometimes the important thing is that the player doesn't move on too quickly or too passively. A lot of text to read, or several rooms to walk across may just help to pace out the moment. I'm also a fan of mini games, or to put another way, mechanics of questionable quality made specifically for one scene. It's likely that even if you're no Konami at rhythm design, and I'm not, the player will recognize the specialness in this kind of effort. And I find that when the heavy lifting of story building is done, this is some of the most creatively spontaneous and gratifying work I can layer into a game. Spontaneity hinges on the early foundations of a story. If a scene isn't working, it helps to know what needs to be said. Then we can play with the tone. I find pretty consistently, if a scene feels like it sucks, I haven't found what's funny about it yet. Editorially, it's good to understand your intentions with a story so you can let go of the things you're precious about. Sometimes it's just clever, and that's all it is, and it has to go. Maybe this is because I'm a cartoonist, but I think the artwork is crucial in early stages too. Those early marks carry an energy that is likely to carry through production. Sometimes I just can't feel a scene or test its potency until I've visualized it. And I think it's a good idea to practice visualizing one's work with as little artwork as possible. We don't want to stunt our workflow with details that could potentially change later. But sometimes you're sick of writing and you need to see it. Drawing can feel very intimate in these moments. It's not the sort of thing I would show live on a stream, although that's exactly what I'm doing right now. But the game is done, so. It's embarrassing to place the first marks, especially when it already looks perfect as a vague shadow in my head. I think people are often tempted to let their work go unrealized because their imagination is a playground and the page is a battleground. There is some amount of acceptance when we draw. Certain preconceptions are going to morph or die, and other things will surprise us in wonderful ways. Drawing is a series of negotiations where dreams calcify, commitments are made. Beneath the layers of every finished drawing is a stubborn thicket of decisions fighting to be made, being callously overridden. Focus is the sacrifice we make on those dreams to share them with the world. Trust is an important skill to build. As an example, for years I watched Bob Ross paint on TV, and I'd scream at him when he made a mark that so obviously ruined the picture. But then, moments later, he'd flesh that out, and I'd see his intent. It's necessary to be trusting of our own movements because they need to be made by a confident hand. Bob had to ruin a lot of paintings for real to learn how to ruin them the right way. I think we need to get back to what's personal about games. In the global casino rising around us, God, I hate this website. Games and their success have become an object of speculation. Whether on the publishing or player end makes no difference. We are all invested in whether the games get the concurrent player numbers and Steam reviews that place them in the realm of success or devastating failure. We think about these things far in advance of the game's release. And while it is prudent to consider whether a game can someday recoup its costs, certainly our families are trusting us to do this, I think it's completely senseless to design around that concern. For one thing, we're never going to get it right. Whatever you think the market wants will be irrelevant in a few years when the game ships. And what you're left with then is not a work of art, but all the ways in which you sought to accommodate an imagined audience. We have no choice but to create intimately, to look and listen to ourselves and know what we specifically are here to say. There is no guarantee anyone will listen, but it's the one thing we have that no one else does. We cannot deny ourselves that truth. We cannot deny the world that truth, regardless of when or to what degree they'll notice. We have to resist efforts to retrain our lives in service of the machines. We have to know deeply that there are no shortcuts to what is beautiful and worth telling stories about in this life. There are no shortcuts to telling a story because no story is correct or incorrect or possible to analyze on such terms. Now, I hesitate to bring a ghastly quote about Gen AI into polite conversation, but it's my keynote, so I don't have to be that polite. And besides, I'm not sure I'll ever get a chance to be so personally offended again. In discussing his AI-generated animated show for Amazon, which we now already know will not materialize, Jorge Gutierrez said that working with AI was, quote, like having sex and then they hand you the baby. So, if you saw me walk in today, you know I have no dog in this fight. I don't want to focus too hard on Jorge. The baby he thought he was handed never existed and never will. While writing this speech, I couldn't even find a real clip of him saying that line, just a quote from an enthusiastic booster who was there. Oh, right. I have another slide of him upside down to illustrate how he's wrong. Maybe this too is fake discourse, but I think it's an incredible quote because it so correctly describes what I've been feeling, what I think many people are feeling, that the vision of the world we're being peddled does not include us. There is a subgroup of subhumans who are tired of and looking to dispense with this, the 40-week process by which organs, bones, and sinew are formed, in which everything is at stake and nothing is guaranteed. There she is. I decided to have a second child while rounding the corner of my latest game. In previous years, when I was really focused on balancing my work and daily life, I couldn't imagine going through childbirth again. Suddenly, at the end of this long game dev cycle, I saw an opening, a possible future. And it became a beautiful idea to me, as so many ideas do when they've ripened into their time. It's pure coincidence that my last menstrual period, generally defined as day 1 of a pregnancy, occurred on the release day of Station to Station. But I'm a storyteller, so I do find the synergy pretty delicious. This is a real chart. At my age, the risk of pregnancy loss is high, something like 40% in the first trimester. Beyond that, chromosomal imbalance leads to complications that lead to complications and death are far more likely. Under the best circumstances, a young, healthy mother will rarely reveal a pregnancy before the initial 12-week development of bodily structures. If the worst happens, they may never talk about it at all. The most vulnerable time in the process is also the most alienating. So, I love this poster so much. So a lot of people want to forget the process, the aches and pains and the sacrifice needed to bring things to life. In postpartum terminology, the forgetting is known as the halo effect, the supposed euphoria of meeting your baby that wipes the anguish of labor so you'll get right back to making them. I didn't do that, but I did jump right into my second game after finishing the first, which was not great for my health. So I know this type of amnesia exists. It doesn't have to happen though. It probably shouldn't. It's just tempting. This flattening effect of difficult, trying times. How nice to put the process out of your mind and think only of the pleasure of conception and the final product. Those things are useful if they help motivate you to finish, but ideas and calm are not that special. I part with them regularly. Most of it is not viable. What makes something viable is its all-in commitment against its own death, its struggle to be calm. I want to loop back to the kind of person who can't find the risky things they did in their youth. Taking no risks while life passes you by is also very risky. And I think that's also something worth writing about. I didn't always think my life was a story worth telling. There was always some bit of truth in the narrative threads I would follow, but I'd often pad them out with the tropes of fiction and a winking millennial self-awareness. I think to some extent, I was afraid of saying or even acknowledging too much about myself. But in holding back, in being fearful, I was exposing myself to a far worse criticism, that my work was boring, impersonal, that I was spending my life on work that didn't say much, and maybe worse, that gave me no relief from loss or heartbreak or the things about myself that seemed strange and unbelonging. I can't think of anyone whose life is not interesting. This guy is interesting to me. Even if you wojacked out at your desk for 10 years, something was happening. Your pets and family members were dying around you. Your body was aging. Your attitude, your ideals were evolving as a creeping sense of your own mortality grew. Your hometown was being bulldozed and repaved. The bottles of piss were accumulating under your seat, raising you off the ground like an egg-laying hen in a Looney Tunes cartoon. The things you loved most as a child were getting old, being forgotten, or worse, being callously resurrected for your nostalgia dollars. Changes were happening against your will. How interesting is that? But it's much more likely that even the most inhibited among us were encountering other people. These interactions meant something to us and to them. Maybe some of these people became important to us. Maybe that caught us off guard. Maybe some of them have exited our lives. Maybe some of those departures were abrupt and some happened while we were paying attention to other things. Maybe there are things that are still maddeningly unknowable about those people who left us. How interesting is that? We've all been passionate in our lives. We've felt fascination for things in this world. Can we explain why those things were so fascinating? Can we make someone else feel what we felt when that thing occupied our minds? Walter Benjamin said that no object comes alive within a collector. It is, in fact, the collector who comes alive in these objects. How does something do that to us? Can we be the creators of such an object? I don't see myself as a particularly daring person, but if I look back at my relatively intact life, I see I have taken many risks. There are countless moments and long blocks of time I'll revisit and say, oh God, that could have been it for me. Sure, my life has dealt me a variety of cards, but so much of it came down to me. If I hadn't been able to look myself in the eye and be brave and let the truth come out, things could have been very different. These are the great death-defying adventures of my life. And they're still happening. And I think we can all find that in ourselves. And if not, we can still construct our own personal Wuthering Heights as vengeance on generations of our enemies. How interesting is that? Many years ago, before I met your father, or was even aware I wanted to be a mother, a friend told me that every child born is a book their mother won't get to write. And I internalized that, and it's meant many things to me over the years. I think it's worth noting that this friend of mine eventually became a mother of two, as I've recently chosen to do. And I think there's something beautiful in that duality, the acceptance and defiance of the threat. Now, I no longer believe my friend's slogan. It turns out I did manage to write 300,000 words as a first-time parent. But I think a childhood is a perfectly good book on its own, whether you write it down or just watch it happen. Perhaps I could have made these two games faster without the demands of parenthood, but truthfully, without the reflection of my experience, I'm not sure I would have made these games at all. The certainty of death allows us to feel the exuberance of life. And I believe that the threat of confinement, of true commitment, leads us to harness every breath of freedom we have. It took 4 years to make each game, and in that time I gave everything I had to them. Parenthood stretched the amount of everything I felt I could give. And it's just one of the many changes a life can witness that will propel its author into deeper, more meaningful work. I could not have lived with my memories any faster, let alone written them down. They would have manifested differently if I hadn't had them while living in this new context, experiencing the wonders of nature and human creation as novel things. Everything new through a dazzled, hopeful gaze. Dead and dying things, reborn, redeemed. Are these not the contents of a story worth living? I'm very excited for the possibilities in games narrative. I believe we've only begun to crack into it. And I think that, as the value of the artist is harshly debated in the fake-ass sphere of discourse, we have a wonderful opportunity to do the most subversive thing of all. Slip away and quietly live our lives. It's what I look forward to most, and I hope someday to tell you about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meredith. We have some time, so if you're willing to take some questions,
Let's do it.
we'll pass this mic around.
Yeah.
Generally, I'll run up and down. Yes, okay.
Like an easier way.
Hello. Thanks so much for the lovely keynote. That was great. I'm wondering about what are your artistic inspirations? Like what other artists, you talk about your life, but the way that you portray your life and being a cartoonist is kind of where do your sources, how do you tell these stories come from? Is it just games? Is it other media?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you can speak to this.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So the reason I don't talk about that, even though I do get asked that pretty frequently, is because I feel like ultimately it's really just the basis of where I get my inspiration. If I'm talking about comics, I'm very influenced by Calvin and Hobbes and, the cartoonists who sort of stubbornly stuck to the message of their work. In games, I was very influenced by Roberta Williams and the golden age of Sierra point-and-click adventure games. But I don't bring it up so much because I think it's more important that I took a departure from that work than the fact that I was influenced by it. It was foundational, but I needed to break away from it and become something distinct.
What do you think your next game will be about?
Wouldn't you like to know? Well, I would say that I was taking a break, but obviously I went ahead and did something else right away. But I am taking a break from making games right now for the first time in 8 years. And it's been a wonderful period of reflection on what I really want to do with the next few years of my life. So I'm not quite ready to say that, but I do feel that it's coming into its own in my mind right now. So hopefully by the next NarraScope, it'll be all known.
So a lot of ink has been spilled by men about kind of the function of artistic creation as a stand-in for pregnancy. That's kind of you see Freud talk about that, you see kind of a lot of historical artists talk about that, and I have complicated feelings about it, but I'm interested in, obviously for you, you're thinking a lot about how the creation of art and pregnancy are deeply entwined. I guess from a very different angle. I guess I'm curious to you about, do you see this tension play out in other ways? You talked about how it informs your work, but do you see how maybe it informs your peers, or how it kind of has shaped the art that surrounds you?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it absolutely has informed me because I feel like when I became pregnant, I was suddenly alerted to the joke that you can't really understand what it's like until you experience it. And I think that's true of many stages of our lives, but it's just one example of something that is like inherently extremely painful and traumatic, and when you go through it, you feel like you've come out on the other side of something that you can explain to other people, but they won't necessarily know exactly what you mean. So I feel like if I describe childbirth to somebody, that's not really as effective as making a game that says who I am and how I feel at this moment.
Hi, so we're the same age, very different life choices, but the thing I'm interested in is like where I'm at, I'm struggling to fit in art alongside everything else in life, and I'd like to hear something that worked well for you or something that didn't.
Well, I definitely have found that, like, whether I had had children or not, my life would have grown more complicated, my responsibilities would have grown. And, when I was younger, I spent a lot of time like sitting in coffee shops and getting myself all situated and kind of waiting for the world to inspire me. And I heard some years ago, I'm forgetting who said this, but she said, I don't wait for my muse to visit me anymore, I shoot her out of the sky. And I think that's kind of how it has evolved for me, is that I found my comfortable place where I can work. There's, maybe one or two variations on it to break up the monotony, but by and large, a solid routine helps me to get in the zone far more than, kind of moving around inconsistently and sampling as much of the world and the chaos as possible. So really, sort of ironically, like having a more boring life has really plugged me in and allowed me to think my thoughts better.
As an artist who also uses her art and creative process to kind of express my experiences and feelings, I'm wondering for you if there's anything you feel like that has been off limits to showcase in your games or even your own comics and work. Is there anything? I think I've had a hard time kind of deciding if there's something not worth sharing, but for me, I kind of lean more I'm willing to share everything through my art because it helps me process things. So I'm wondering if you kind of bumped into something where you're I don't feel like this is appropriate to put in art, or not appropriate, but feel maybe more so for your own self and your own boundaries and experience and feeling.
Absolutely. I mean, before I made the first Perfect Tides game about being 16, I thought that being 16 was off limits. I thought there was no way I could possibly express this. It just hurts too much. It's just too awful. It's not, other people would not understand. And the more I sort of arrived at this idea that maybe they'd understand, the more I felt like I had to push that limit in myself and not have that boundary. Now, I'm not saying that people should be completely without boundaries in the content of the work they express, but I think there's always a way to talk about just about anything. And if you feel even a little tickle of I kind of want to talk about this, then it's time to talk about it. There are definitely things that I haven't arrived at yet that I feel, just based on history, I probably will get to at some point.
Hello.
Hi.
So this is more of a comment than a question. No, I'm kidding. I have a question.
I'll answer it anyway.
Okay. One of the things I love about the Perfect Ties games is how you create this fantastic sense of place and world building, obviously putting in your own experiences. But you do it in this great way where it's not oh, hey, remember this from this? It's not explicit. And there's this beautiful thing where it's you put in super specific details. If you know, the Dr. Z ads in Perfect Tides 2. So my question is, what's the most specific thing that you've put in that you thought was no one's ever going to get this, that you've gotten feedback from being oh my God, I got that.
I kind of in the moment and for many years afterwards, I did feel the relationships described in my games were that specific. And, maybe that explains the character's justification for being in these relationships to begin with, is that she was so certain that there was something unique about them, something almost unspeakable about them that nobody else would understand. So I'm sure I can think of a detail on the wall that would be even more specific than that one, but I think that the specificity of the situations in the game, I didn't have total confidence until the game was out in the world that anybody would be like, how do you know exactly what my relationships in college were like? It's it's an enormous relief and an enormous catharsis to me that people do recognize things in the specific. If I have to say that word one more time. In the specificity, yes.
Feel free to tell me this is none of my damn business, but are you naming your children after your favorite IF characters, or is it the other way around? Because it's got to be one or the other.
I can't see where you are. Who am I speaking to? Hi. No, I gotta keep that stuff separate, they gotta have their own lives. There's definitely I look for significance in naming, and I look for significance in, every tattoo I put on my body and whatever, but it really has to be a separate thing for me. I think, I feel myself departing from my influences, and I know that this child is the future and they need to have something free of all that.
Hi, so I have a two-part question, and they're both about essentially what you were talking about, having that personal voice and not chasing Steam trends and such, right? So the first part of the question is that for Perfect Tides, both games, even though it is a very personal story, it is something that is still in a pretty gaming audience sense. It's very related. It's a very relatable part of life, right? More so than, for instance, if you were to make a game about your current point in life.
Yes.
Someone going through their second pregnancy later on in life and such. Well, my first question is, do you see there being space for that story, for something that's even more niche in a way within the gaming space, and how it relates to just getting this on Steam and how getting it out into the world and such, right? And the second part is essentially both games have been of a scope that is not just a 5-minute game on itch, right? And so they've taken significant investments of time, both yours and others. What are the paths, what are your recommendations for doing that sustainably while still finding that personal voice and being and not chasing the Steam trends, and what are the things that are gonna get me a publishing deal and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess both generally and also how you guys approached it.
Yes. So the first question is something that I've definitely thought about, because I've now passed from my 30s into my 40s, and I have not yet told a story about that. And I think that may be because I'm thinking about things from the child's perspective and reliving childhood through that child. So maybe the 30s, as I see them, are about reliving memories and facing memories as you live, one would hope, a somewhat more stable, more self-realized version of your young adult life. And I recognize that both of these games, as niche as I feel the type of game and the perspective might be, they are still somewhat about youth culture, about being young and appealing to a demographic that is dominant on Steam. So I'm thinking a lot about it. I don't know the answer, but at the same time, I know that if I did have that story, if I really felt that story, I would have to do it, regardless of whether I thought it would succeed or not. And that has been the basis for making all of these games for me. As far as sustainably working on games, I don't recommend making something as big as I did for my first game. I think starting smaller is always a good idea, but I refuse to take my own advice because I had already worked on projects of larger scale, and I feel like I can't really say what I want to say at a smaller scale anymore. But there was a time. So I would recommend scaling down if you can. I would also recommend being willing and able to do just about everything, because if you don't have to pay yourself, then you can get an enormous amount of value out of your work for a sustained amount of time. Working on Perfect Tides, the first game, was really very inexpensive. I fundraised on Kickstarter, and most of that money went to paying other people to help me at the end. But for the first 2 years of production, it was really just me chipping away at the game whenever I could, and all of that cost was my time, which I think is, it's a valuable thing to do with one's time to work on their own work. I don't think, I kind of fantasize about the idea of somebody handing me $1 million for my game, but at the same time, I'm not really sure what I would do with all of it, because I still need to write the story and do all of the pre-production. These are not things that I feel I can pass off to other people. So there is a limited number of jobs to give to other people, and which means there's a limited amount of expense a personal game like this can have.
Thank you so much for this talk. Maybe this is like a related follow-up to what you're just saying, in that I think about how much your work has the texture of the personal in it, but also how much it has, in my opinion, the texture of the medium that it's in as well. Like Octopus Pie is very much the texture of comics, and webcomics is present in it. So as someone who, when you started in this process of making games, and you were learning how to use these tools as you were making the work, I'm wondering if what your experience was like in terms of taking this personal and having this new system, Adventure Game Studio or what have you, of how is the texture of those tools and the texture of that work interfacing with what you see as the texture of your personal narrative and ideas.
Mm-hmm. So with the first game, I do think I was really surprised by how the interactive element of the game made my story stronger. I didn't exactly expect that until people started to play it, and I realized that the way they were reacting to the game was pretty different from the way they reacted to the comics, because they felt immersed in it. When they talked about the story, they were not always using the characters' names. Sometimes they were saying me and I. So I think that kind of, I don't know that I considered it as strongly with that first game, but with the second one, having that knowledge, I was definitely allowed to have more spontaneous ideas about how I could play with the mechanics, play with the pacing of the game, and really use it to my advantage. And it also helped that I finally learned how to program a function, which I didn't do at all for the first game. It is just like a series of if-then statements. And, sometimes that's what you do. You just power through with your own stupidity until it turns into the thing you want. But I felt that with more programming knowledge, I was able to envision far more ways to do that.
Hi, Meredith. Thanks so much for your talk. I'm really curious to hear if you feel or know of a space where authentic discourse is happening, like non-fake discourse is happening, and how you as a maker decide to participate or disengage with those spaces.
Mm-hmm. I think, it's tough, because I think if we all knew a place, we'd be there. I think that anywhere where you can go long form is just going to be better. I think anytime where you're clipping something that is basically the size of a headline, there's never going to be any depth to it. I find that, even places like Reddit kind of maintain this 101 level of discussion, just based on the influx of new people who are always at that 101 level, and how that sort of ends up dominating the space. So I don't think the solution is like forums full of old heads who try to like shame people into being new, to not being new. But I think like, anything, I actually, I do like a live stream once a week with my brother. And when I first started doing it, I was like, this is like 2 hours of live entertainment where I'm conversing with someone I know well. I'm gonna say so many stupid things on this, and I do and have, and it feels like at some point I realized it's okay because people are not looking to clip every 2 seconds of a 3-hour long stream to rile themselves or other people up over it. Like, this is actually a way that I can engage with deeper ideas because I can say stupid things that I'm not even 100% sure I believe and think about whether I believe in them. I think anywhere where that can be done, where people can kind of just like, shoot it with other people is a good space for that. Obviously I think a conference like this is wonderful, but I think, really just like having close social groups that you have intimate conversations with is really the best way to find that.
Hi. So following on the question about boundaries, whenever I think of writing anything with autobiographical elements, I always wonder, I know this isn't pure autobiography, maybe it's fictionalized just enough, but how do you navigate not what you reveal about yourself, but about other people? Has there been any, maybe it's like far enough back because you're writing about childhood, maybe the people who these figures are maybe recognizably to them based on just aren't aware of it, or like people in your life, your family, whether that's, how you portrayed them or like revealing what you actually thought about them the whole time. I'm just curious if like how you think about that and if there have been any like noticeable consequences or reactions.
Yeah, I think it's something I worry about more than actually happens. I think, I would like to think that these are very fictionalized versions of the people I know, and would hopefully, if seen by that person, they would have some understanding that this is not literally exactly what they are. In terms of people who have actually told me how they feel, like my older brother did play through the first game, and he's like, I'm like the villain in this. I feel like we've also kind of reconciled what that relationship was, and the game is sort of just an extension of my reconciliation and my love for these people, for just about all of these people who, even if I have depicted something very negative, very hurtful that happened between us, I feel like I'm trying to present that in the most loving way, that, I was not completely absent of blame in these situations either. I hope.
Hello. My question is, like I assume a lot of other people in this room, I'm constantly confronting the issue of, I want to make games, but I also need to pay rent and feed myself. And obviously everyone's path to finding that sustainability is going to be different because everyone has different circumstances, but do you have any like general advice because for like how to like make it work?
It is incredibly hard, and especially incredibly hard at the beginning. When I was doing comics, I was really beginning from a baseline of no existing work. And I think the thing that has supported me the most over the years is just consistently building a backlog of existing work. When the first Perfect Tides game came out, I think it was met with about the amount of success that like a very small indie point and click adventure could be expected to have. And the thing that has worked so beautifully for it is that people have continued very slowly but consistently to talk about the game over many years. And I didn't even really think about this until the second game was released, but now when I make sales, I'm making twice as many. And that now seems like it's a passive thing that's happened because I've built up this backlog. So I know saying like work on one game for no money and then work on a second one and release both of them and then there'll be money is not an easy pill to swallow. But I think when people look for viability long term, a library of work becomes viable over time.
Any other questions? Yes. Oh, that's a tough one. All right, hold on.
In the very center
Very
of the center.
You. Hi there. Thank you so much for this. I was curious, you've kind of touched on it, like next to it a number of times. Could you speak a little bit more on the coverage you got at announcement versus the coverage on release and what that expectation and reality ended up being?
Well, I think, for one thing, I think it seemed like there was a bit more of an angle for people because I had very recently finished my comic and it was fresh in people's minds and they were thinking like cartoonist turning into game developer. So for one thing, there was a story there. And then for the other thing, a lot of the outlets who covered me and the people who were interested in the game found themselves unmoored without an outlet just a few years later. So, unfortunately, in the media of games, we have seen a lot of closures, a lot of layoffs, a lack of willingness to cover smaller games just based on the traffic that they can generate with a review of a smaller game. So it is definitely a more difficult world right now for developers who want anybody to care about what they're doing. You essentially need a lot of money in marketing and or some sort of viral explosion to happen around your game to assure any kind of mass amount of attention. All that said, I think I never really quite got anything like that with these games, but I think it has been a small wave after small wave of people acknowledging the game, people wanting to tell their friends about it and boosting it, and I think that does build over time, and again, it compounds because people like a game and they want their friends to know about it. So I guess what I'm saying is if game is good, that can help you, but game is often good and ignored, so there are just so many tiny little factors that we need to be attentive to at this point. I don't have a blueprint for it, but it is, I think, without a doubt, much more difficult than it used to be.
I think this will be last question. So does anyone want to be brave and take the last question?
Come on.
Come on. Wow. Okay. Oh, yes. Oh, someone else in the middle. Thank God. Here you are.
I came up with a better question now. I didn't know I was going to be last. I wanted to ask, you talked a lot about stepping away from a lot of the discourse of the internet to be able to make your own work. Something that a lot of artists will talk about is reading from a lot of different sources to find inspiration. What do you find is the difference for you between taking inspiration from others people's work versus striking out on your own, if you will? You kind of talked about with Calvin and Hobbes, the Sierra work, how you're defined more and how you've departed from that than that you liked that. So that's sort of my question.
Yeah, I mean, I think a very small pool can really give you the information you need, because ultimately, I think this is what you're asking, is that you want to know you're on the right track with something. And, Bill Watterson, the creator of Calvin and Hobbes, said that he wasn't thinking about the massive newspaper reading audience in the 1980s. He was showing his strips to his wife to make her laugh. And if she laughed, it goes to print. And, if you read like the collections where he comments on his own strips, he's like, this one got us canceled. And like, this one pissed people off. And I think the reason that strip survives as a legacy strip is because ultimately he was not listening to any of that and was kind of required not to. He was listening to somebody he loved. And I think, I don't know quite the story of Roberta Williams and her influences, but I feel like she was just trying to mess with her husband and force him to develop greater technology so she could make greater games. And I feel like there must have also been an intimacy there, a need to create to impress one person. And I think that's really where I go. My husband hears about everything I write before I commit it to paper. It has to pass that smell test for him. And if it does, then I feel like, okay, I need to do this now. It makes sense to me now.
Well, let's just give one massive round of applause again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Incredible.